أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم المصطفى الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما والحمد لله على كل حال سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم إني أعوذ بك أن أدل أو ضل أو زل أو زل أو أظلم أو أظلم أجهل أو يجهل علي. So Alhamdulillah, I just got off of a flight coming back from the East Coast, and I went out there a few days ago for a janaza, and this was the wife of my oldest brother, who just she suddenly passed away, and they have 6 children. They just bought like some land and a house and everything, and it really it should, like the reminder of death should put things in perspective. That was really the reason why I wanted to go. Because he was telling me, no, you don't have to go. We're having a family here, da 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 da. But I know that, seeing death up close, like these are his wife. These are people we grew up with, right? Like we've known each other since we were their age. What's your name, young man? Sean. And what's your brother's name? Is that your brother? Your cousin? He's your cousin. What's his name? Ayan. So since we grew up from that age, and she just suddenly passed. She went to the hospital with pains in her back and her side, and like within 3 or 4 days she was dead. Allah took her back. Now, of course, we believe in qadr. We believe in qadr. We know that somebody's time that they die, it was written before they were born. We know that. But what are the lessons that we're supposed to take from that? Right? Like we're supposed to, we don't. Rasulullah, he told us to visit the graves. We don't. He told us to, think about the thing that destroys pleasures, which is death. Like you're going to die. So I just I just really want to reflect on, like, how are we living? How are we living? Before I go into the topic, because I think this is part of the topic. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about 4 stations, 4 spiritual stations that a person can aspire to. One of them is outside of your control. The other 3 is totally up to you. And each and every one of us has to ask, like, what are we doing to achieve that? All right? So at the top of the list is the Anbiya and Rusul. Okay? The prophets and the messengers. And no one can choose to be a prophet or a messenger. They are chosen. They are Mustafa. Allah chose them. Okay? So that's outside of our control. And Rasuli Akram, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he's the last and final prophet. All right? So there's no prophets or messengers coming after him. There'll be no new dispensations. It won't. There won't be. After that, anybody know what's the next one? Yes, but how is it mentioned in the Quran? You're right. He's right. But how is it mentioned in the Quran? Awliya. The friends of Allah. And that's what the muhsin is, right? Like that's the more generic term. But Allah calls them awliya in the Quran. And you have the potential to be a friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why we're going over the life of Sidi Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba. Okay? Because he tells us step by step how he arrived at certain spiritual stations. Step by step. Okay? And then after that, what is after that? What is after the awliya? The friends of God. That is one that is mentioned. But that is one that is mentioned. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. We'll get there. But the shuhada are included in the awliya. Right? What are the favors that the shuhada get? The day of judgment, they have no punishment. They have no questioning. They're watching the judgment. They're raised at high ranks. So because of the way they lost their life here, or the way they lived their life and died here, they become awliya. So they're included in that station. Even though yes, you're right, they are mentioned. The next one is ulama. The alim. The one who, right? He has knowledge which helps him to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's a difference between knowing something and practicing something. The way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses it in the Quran is the one who knows and practices. Right? Not just he theoretically knows it. Oh yes, I know that, this is bad to do, but he still does it. He wouldn't be considered an alim of the ulama. He wouldn't be considered someone who's scholarly. Rabbaniyun. No, he's not that. It's just information. It's not knowledge. Okay? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the ulama, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْأُلَمَا. It is the ones who truly, truly have khashya of Allah are those who have true knowledge. The implication is by practicing what you know, Allah elevates your spiritual state. And by that, He gives you khashya. He gives you this reverence. He gives you this awe of Him because He removes those veils. All right? Now, what's the lowest level? What is the lowest level you can aspire to? There's nothing lower than this. And if you're not aspiring at least to this, then you have to really ask yourself, what are you doing? What are you doing? The lowest level you can aspire to is salihin. To be righteous. That's the lowest level. There's nothing lower than that. And that is where the Muslimin, mu'minin, right? They're in that category. The scholars describe the salih, the one who is righteous, as he follows the dictates of God day and night. He knows what Allah wants and he does it. He doesn't give excuses. He doesn't look for ruqsa, the easy way out. He knows what Allah wants. He knows what God wants. And then he embarks on that. There's no spiritual station lower than that. After that, you fall into fasiqun, the wrongdoers. You fall into munafiqun, the hypocrites. right? Zalimun, they do wrong all the time. So, like, what are we doing? Where are we at? What are we aspiring to? I think this is a very important question. Parents, you have an obligation to guide your children, to tell them what is important in life. Okay? One of the great Hanbali scholars, he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask the parents whether they fulfilled the rights of their children before he asks the children whether they fulfilled the rights of their parents. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because we harp on that as a community. We harp on that, right? Obey your parents. Have respect for your parents. Did you respect your children? Did you give your rights? Did you give the children their rights? And they have rights. I have a book this thick that describes the rights of the children. They have rights. And I'm not speaking theoretically. As soon as I came home 7 years ago, the first thing I did was begin to educate my children. And it's important. Why is it important? I just heard of a story of a sister. She's going to the seminary here in Diamond Bar, the Islamic seminary. She's in her 40s. And she's complaining about how her parents guided her. She said, my parents were worried about me becoming a doctor. My parents were worried about me becoming an engineer. My parents were worried about me becoming a lawyer. But they were not worried about me, about my spiritual state, Yawm al-Qiyamah. They wronged her. They wronged her. So she's a doctor. She knows what HealthNet wants. She knows what Kaiser wants. She doesn't know what Allah wants. So her parents have wronged her. But of course, now that she's making money, they're going to say, right? Ihsan, bir al-walidain, respect your parents, even though they did not respect her. And they did not respect Allah's right over her. So now we can talk. We were talking about Sidi Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba. We were talking about the shaykh from Morocco, who's known. He's known. He was a master of the Islamic sciences. This is what we went over the last time. What was this, a month ago? Went over this a month ago. Sidi Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba. Jazakallah khair. Okay. We were talking about, we were using him as like a spiritual model, spiritual development. And I told you all that he wrote his own biography for two reasons. Number one, he didn't want anybody to exaggerate in his affair, which sometimes we do. We really like someone, we magnify what we want to magnify, or we lessen what we want to lessen. So he said, no, I'm going to write my own biography and so that I can tell the story as it is. And then he begins to tell us. He told us how he lived his youth, right? Even though he didn't have teachers in his village, he was attracted to knowledge. When he was turned 17, he finally found a teacher who said, you have to leave this place, come with me. And then he went and he studied for a long time. I think it was about 7 years, 6 or 7 years. And I told you last time I was here, like the depth that he went into of all the different Islamic sciences. All right? So, there's, I don't want to go through that again. But, just to give you an example, we don't have Sahih al-Bukhari here, right? But, Sahih al-Bukhari, there's about 8,000 hadith in there, in the Sahih al-Bukhari. And very similar in the Sahih of Muslim, Sahih of Imam Muslim. Sahih of Bukhari. And he tells us that he went through those books 6 times with different teachers. The whole thing. The whole thing. That's just in the hadith sciences. Right? That's just in the hadith sciences. That's, you know, and you know, the what is the collection? Maybe 10 volumes? Right? If you get a commentary on it, it's like 25 volumes. He's telling you, I did this. So the first thing that he's doing, he's laying out that he's a scholar. He's a scholar. He was of the scholarly class in this country. And he used to tell us, he told us in the book that when he used to go to the marketplace, he said that there's sometimes you know, like when he would come walking into the marketplace, because of his status, the people knew his level of knowledge. Because he was the qadi, he was, you know, he was known for his level of knowledge. He would come into the marketplace, and he said that the crowd would part for him like Allah parted the Red Sea for Nabi Musa. So this was his rank. This is how the people held him in esteem. I also told you all that he was from the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was Ahl al-Bayt. All right? And that's and I told you last time that this is one of the characteristics that you'll always find in the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There are people who are purified. Right? Because this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted. This is what Allah wanted. He says in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيَذْهِبَ عَنْكُمْ رِجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرُكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. This is what Allah wanted for the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that they be purified. And this is talking about spiritual purity. It's not talking about having dirt on your hand and then washing it. It's talking about spiritual purity. Okay? And so you'll always find from the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam exemplars, people who stand out in front, and it's just like they got it. They got it. They have that spiritual insight. They have basira. They have firasa, right? Like you understand people's states just by looking at them. Just by looking at them. They had that. All right? So this is what he had. So if we fast forward a little bit, one of the things that where we left off at is that you know, he read the hikam of Ibn Ata'Allah al-Iskandari, which I explained to you was it's like aphorisms, very, very powerful aphorisms that's teaching powerful lessons in very short couplets in Arabic. Very powerful. And he said once he began, you know, after he learned the knowledge and he was involved in teaching and giving fatwa and things like that, you know, giving religious verdicts, that after he read that, his heart just began to he wanted to draw near to Allah. That's what he wanted. Because the things that he was reading in the book was about that. The obstacles that keeps us, right? There's a veil between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The veil is not with God. The veil is with you. Okay? There are things that we do that put us distance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Things that we do. Sometimes it's just being heedless. Right? We fill our hearts with digital images. This has an effect on your heart. It has an effect. Okay? That becomes like a veil if you don't work to remove it. Okay? So he wanted to so he did the exterior work, which was learning. He learned first. Hard memorization, 7 years, dedicating himself to just learning Islamic law, learning what Allah and His Messenger want. Okay? And then he mastered that. He mastered it. And then he comes across this book, and now he's like, what I have learned outwardly, I want to benefit from inwardly. Okay? It has to pass from the outward to the inward. Okay? And so that's what he started doing. Now, what ended up happening was he began to shy away from people. He began to avoid people. Okay? Because what are the 4 principles of purification? Four principles of purification. Eat less. Talk less. Sleep less. And associate with people less. Okay? Because all of these things are veils. They're like, why do we fast during the month of Ramadan? We fast a whole month. So that you can teach your nafs, right? Those inner workings, the inner drivings, to teach them discipline. So you eat less. If during Ramadan, you have a huge feast at iftar, when you break the fast, you miss the point. You miss the point. All right, so inshallah, this Ramadan is what, in about 3 weeks, 2 weeks, right? Commit to eating less. Commit to eating less, right? Talking too much, unless you're learning or teaching, it's a veil. It's a veil, right? Sleeping too much. Of course, the body loves this. The body loves it, right? But loyalty to God is to replace the things that you love with the things that He loves. That's wafa. That's being loyal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sacrifice what you want for what He wants. Right? And then associating with people less. So he started to practice these principles. And the first thing is, as many times it happens, you know, when somebody decides that they want to change their life, they want to do something, they want to improve, the first resistance that they get is from their own family. From their own family. No, he's no different. It came from his family. His family is the one saying, what are you doing? Right? And it led to a discussion between him and his father. Because he had explained to his brother what he was doing. He told his brother what he was doing. But his brother thought that he had waswasa. His brother was like, he has, you know, he either has waswasa or he has ayn, right? Somebody looks at you with the evil eye, right? Or waswasa, meaning like a jinn or something is whispering to you and forcing you to do something. Because every time he saw people, he would go the other way. He didn't want to be bothered. So remember, he's a scholar. So people are going to seek him out. People are going to come to him. And he would see the people and it was just a burden on him. So his father finally came and talked to him. And he said, who is better? His father's asking him this question. Who is better? The wali, the friend of God, or the alim, the one who's knowledgeable, the scholar? Who is better? And he tells us that out of adab, he didn't get into it with his father. But in the book, he goes through it and he mentions what Imam Qushayri said, what Ibn Rushd said, what Imam Ghazali said. He goes through Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, like he goes through all these different scholars, what they said, right? And the end of the discussion is, of course, it's the wali. Because you can have knowledge of God, but it doesn't mean that God drew you near. But the wali is the one who Allah drew him near. His knowledge actually benefited him. His knowledge actually benefited him. And so he has the spiritual states. The spiritual states, not just gift of the gab, but there are spiritual rewards. Right? Like certainty, yaqeen. Yaqeen. We're not talking about iman. Right? Iman, belief, faith. This is general. This is minimum. But yaqeen is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives on top of that. With people who are loyal to Him. He gives them yaqeen with their faith. I gave a khutbah here one time about yaqeen, just yaqeen. And I explained that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted Abraham to be of those that had yaqeen. He already had faith. But Allah wanted him to have yaqeen. He wanted him to be certain. So Ibn Kathir and some of the other scholars said, Allah removed the veil between him and the seven heavens, up all the way to the arsh, and the seven earths, all the way down to the hellfire, so that he could know without doubt, ayn al-yaqeen, because he actually saw it. It's no longer at the level of iman. There's no doubt there. Now he's certain of what is in the malakut, the unseen realm. He's certain of it. These are the gifts that Allah gives to the awliya that he may not give to the ulama. You understand the difference? Just because somebody studies, they know a lot, they've learned this, they read the book, and they might not have certainty. They might not have firasa. They may not be able to, when your spiritual sight and your eyesight become one. Your spiritual sight and your eyesight become one. Right now, you all are looking at me, right? Allahu a'lam. Maybe there's someone here with firasa. But you can reach a level where you can see someone with your physical sight, and at the same time, Allah lets you see their spiritual state. You may come into contact with someone, and you look at them briefly, and for a brief moment, you see a pig. And when you look again, you see the normal person. But you understand, right? You just saw his spiritual state. His spiritual state was a pig. Okay? We all have spiritual states. Every single one of us has a spiritual state. Right? In the spiritual realm, the angels call you something. They call you truthful, or liar, or deluded, or faithful. In the spiritual realm, you have a name. And it's based upon what you do all the time. And this is one of the gifts that Allah gives to the awliya. Allah shares his secrets with them. So they began to see things as they are with the permission of Allah. All right? Okay. So then he tells us, that he told his father, he said, because his father was trying to get him to continue his studies, he said, I've already studied. Right? And he's like, I studied with some of the best ulama, like the highest level of learning. Right? I won't turn away from what I've undertaken, meaning this path of purifying his soul. Okay? Then he goes to this chapter on marriage, and I'm just going to spend a little bit of time here, right? And the reason why this is important is because one of the secrets of marriage is it helps you to develop your character. It helps you to develop your character. Anybody who has been married knows this very well. Who you really are rises to the top. And everybody has to either accept you or reject you. And this is one of the secrets of getting married. And one of the things that we do with our families and with marriage is we don't have husn al-akhlaq with them. We don't. When these are the first people that you should have husn al-akhlaq with, good character. How do you speak to your loved ones, your family members? How do you keep relations? How does the husband speak to the wife? How does the wife speak to the children? This is the measure of a person's akhlaq. And that's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the measure of a man is how he treats his women folk. Is how he treats his women. You want to know how a man is? Find out how he treats the women around him. find out how he treats the women around him. Women, you want to marry? Find out how he treats the women around him. Okay? And so he tells us that he starts off the chapter saying, and he says it's a hadith, but he says that it was a hadith, but I've heard some scholars say that it was actually an athar, meaning either the companions or the companions of Rasulullah said it, or some of the tabi'een said it. But he says, beware of the plant that grows on the manure pile. Has anyone heard this before? Beware of the plant that grows on the manure pile. And then it says that the people who were listening, they said, what is this plant that grows on the manure pile? And then he said, it is the pretty face that comes from a bad environment. It comes from bad stock. Right? The pretty face, and this can be for women or men. All right? It could be for women or men. This is how he starts off the chapter. So you know he's getting ready to go in. Like, you're going to see, women are going to see men that are very handsome. They look attractive. But when you examine their akhlaq, when you examine their, the way they deal with their family, you understand. You know, he didn't have tarbiyah. He wasn't given adab. He wasn't cultivated correctly. He wasn't developed correctly. So he says, beware of this. And then he starts talking about, he says, it's rare that you have a wali of Allah, you have a friend of God that did not have a wife that mistreated him. And then he starts telling us about them. Right? And he starts with Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. Nabi Ibrahim. Right? We know he had 2 wives. Right? He had Sarah and he had who? In the Bible it says Hagar. Hajar. Right. Hajar. Okay? So, in the hadith, Rasulullah tells us that he wants Nabi. This is a Nabi. This is a Nabi. He goes to Allah and he complains about his first wife. And Allah told him, as long as she does not disobey me, you keep her. Right? And then he talks about his son. In the hadith, Ismail, you know the tradition, when he came to visit his son, Ismail, Nabi Ismail, Ishmael, and he asked, how's the family? And the woman started complaining. Oh, it's like this. It's like she doesn't know this is his father. She starts complaining against Nabi Ismail. So he leaves a message and tells him, leave her. Right? And then he goes to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Do you know that sometimes his wives, they would actually hit him? You know that? Like hit him in his chest? Yeah, it's in the hadith. He was patient with them. Right? And one time, Aisha radiallahu anha, they were having like a dispute, like a husband and wife does, they're kind of arguing, and then Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he comes in. And Rasulullah jokingly says, okay, you can be the arbitrator between us. You be the judge. And then she says, only if you tell the truth. And he slapped her. And he slapped her so hard that it drew blood. And Rasulullah said, if I would have known you would have done that, I would not have invited you in. Right? But he slapped her because he said, how dare you say that the Messenger of Allah says other than the truth? Right? So these things happen. These things happen. What about Umar ibn al-Khattab? When he was Amir al-Mu'mineen and he wanted to go out into Medina to just make sure. This is what he used to do. He used to fear. He said that I fear that even the goats of Medina may complain against me to Allah. So he wanted to go out and find out like what's going on in the city. What's going on? He took his responsibility seriously. He was the governor of the city. So then his wife used to say to him, that's not why you're going out. You just want to go see the young girls of Medina. Right? But he had to bear it patiently. So one day Jabir, one of the companions of Rasulullah Islam, is coming to him and right, he's coming to knock on the door of Umar. Right before he gets ready to knock, he hears them in the house going back and forth. So then he's like, let me get out of here. He leaves. But then Umar radiallahu anh, he sees him leaving and he says, hey, come back. He said, no, I didn't want anything. He said, tell me by Allah, you didn't come here for no reason. Tell me by Allah why you came. He said, I came because I wanted to get advice about some marital situation. But you have the same problem that I have. And Umar radiallahu anh said, listen, like she does this for me, right? She had my children, right? She helps me with my food. She takes care of my household, right? Should I not bear whatever she gives me, right? So this whole chapter, he's explaining that the wali is going to have family problems. It's just part of it. This is how Allah helps you to perfect your character, right? And this is the best way that you learn how to perfect your character. It's easy to be by yourself. It's easy. It's easy to be by yourself. I don't want to get married. I don't want to. That's not the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And how are you going to perfect your character if you don't have to tolerate the harms of somebody who wakes up every morning with bad breath? Right? Somebody who they know your dirt and they remind you of it. Don't tell me, I know you. How? How are you going to learn how to bite your tongue if you're just by yourself? How? That's one of the wisdoms of getting married. And then raising children, having you're both on the same page in the household. You're making the environment safe for them. All right, so this is what he's saying. And then he starts telling us about his wives. Because eventually he had, I think he said he married 3 or 4 times. But he had 4 at one time, and I think he said he divorced one, but he doesn't tell us why. But he said one day, he comes home, and he said he went up, he had like a zawiya, right? Or like a rabat, like his own little, we would call it like a man cave or something, right? Like our own little man cave. He had his own little man cave where he would go up and he would do his ibadah and everything by himself. So his wife was mad at him one day, right? He says that one day she's mad. She comes upstairs, she grabs him by his collar and she drags him all the way down the steps. He said, I was thumping all the way down the steps, thump, 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 right? And then she threw me outside. She pushed me outside and locked the door. I had to spend the whole night outside. But he said, despite that, I had to be with her in a good way. And then he tells us another story where he came home. He said he had just bought 2 loaves of cheese, right? In those days, we would buy the big loaf of cheese, not the little square blocks, but the big loaf. He said he comes in the house and she's angry. He puts the loaves down. She's angry about something. He said, I had just sit down and she picked up the loaf of cheese and she threw it at me. And my head was by the wall. And, so he said, the cheese hit me and made my head hit the wall. And I had a headache for the rest of the night. But despite that, he had good character with her, right? He dealt with her gently, okay? And then he tells us that, he said that the curses and the insults from his wife are too many to count. It's part of it, right? It's part of it. How are you going to learn good character? How are you going to learn good character? Okay? And then he goes on to tell us that he met his shaykh. And I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. Have the keys come yet? They came? So from that point, when he gets married, he said he began teaching for 14 years. So he studied for 7 years, and then he taught for 14 years. now he has high fame in the whole country, right? He's like at the level of a federal court judge in his society. And then he runs across the shaykh, right? He runs across the shaykh who has already done this work, this spiritual work. And he says, he walks into the room. Shaykh Darkawi was there. And if you don't know who they are, you should know. You should find out. Shaykh Darkawi and Shaykh Bouzidi. And he said, he walked into the room and he said they looked at him. And he could tell by the way they were looking at him and making comments to each other that they were pleased with his spiritual state. Right? They're surrounded by people. But when they see him, they see that he's beginning to ripen spiritually. Okay, they see it. They're like, oh, wow, what we could do with him. What if we helped him to perfect himself, his spiritual self? What could we do with him? And so they began, they saw the outward comportment, adab. They saw he had good character outwardly. He knew the law, he knew Islamic law, right? But they could also see that he wasn't finished. He wasn't finished ripening spiritually, inwardly. So they began to take on the project. So the first thing that they told him to do is began to reject the politicians, because he had a lot of political connections, right? Every judge does. He had a lot of political connections. So they were like, sometimes that's a veil, right? That's a veil. Because power, this is where the power is. This is where the power is. And so he's basically telling him, make Allah your source of power, not another human being. So he began to tell him, start staying away from the people and the places of power. Okay? So he said he began to do that. And then he told him, adopt zuhud. Zuhud is asceticism. It is only taking from the world what you absolutely need, even if you have the money. Even if you have the money. You only take what you need. Right? And that was one of the things I was reflecting on at that janazah. When they were putting her into the ground, she didn't take nothing with her. You can't take anything with you. Love whatever you love, you will leave it. So you should love Allah because He's with you wherever you are. This life, the next life, He's with you wherever you are. Right? So he began to tell him to adopt zuhud. And this is when his family started pushing back. Right? Now, he's the one doing it. He's wearing regular clothing when he used to wear the clothes of the clothing of the judge. Now he's just wearing regular clothing. He sews his clothing himself. Okay? He tells us that he sold his library. He had a very expensive library, but he sold it to do some khidmah to the shaykh. He said, but still the people would come to him. The people still would come seeking him. Where is Ibn Ajeeba? Where is Sidi Ahmed? Right? They would still seek him out. People know. People know. When you have goodness, they know. People know. And they seek you out. Right? They begin to, how can I benefit from this person? They know. Okay? So the next thing that he was told to do was to begin to take care of the poor students of the shaykh. The poor students of the shaykh. So now he has to come down to the common level, right? He has to come down to the common level, and he has to use his resources, his financial resources, his bodily resources to take care of the poor amongst the shaykh, of the students of the shaykh. And eventually the shaykh told him, no, you yourself, you buy the soap, right? You buy the soap, you wash their clothing, you yourself wash their clothing, And then even to the point to where you wash their feet. And then you feed them at your house. Now, honestly, how many of us could say we could do that? Right. This is what the shaykh knows. No matter what you claim to be or who you think you are, there is always the ego lurking, hiding. And the way you break it is to serve other people, to prefer other people. But the ego's going to tell you, no, you're like this, you're at this level, you're this, you're this. No, you're not. Don't let the ego lie to you. You're nowhere until you can help people. You can serve them with the same way you serve yourself. The same way you serve yourself. We'll go and cook for ourselves. When's the last time you gave a meal to one of the poor? Make sure that the poor have some food. Right? We'll go buy the Jordans, right? But when it's time to, you see somebody walking with no shoes or just flip-flops and the flip-flops are worn out, will you buy them some shoes? Okay, mashallah, good. Right? Learn from the youth. And this is what the shaykh knows. The shaykh knows this, that the ego, it has to be broken. It's not going to just develop on its own. It has to be put under pressure. The same way, if you want to have pure gold, if you want pure gold, when you first mine the gold, you bring the gold out of the ground, it's mixed with other elements that are not as precious as the gold. So in order to separate the gold from those other elements, you have to put it under the fire. You have to heat it up. That's the same thing that you have to do to the self, the ego, the self. You have to put it under fire. You have to force it to sacrifice. You have to force it to give up what it loves. You have to force it. Okay? And then finally, he begins to tell him to beg in the marketplace. So the sheikh tells us in the book, this was pretty easy. Taking care of the students, washing their feet, buying food for them, looking after them, washing their clothes. That was easy. And he's not talking about go and get he's talking about himself washing the clothes, right? This is in the late 1700s, early 1800s. There's no washing machines. So he's doing it himself. Laundry, himself. All right? He's not going to the cleaners. Yeah, do this. No. Okay? But then the sheikh tells him, the sheikh can see he's progressing, but the sheikh also knows there's still stuff there. There's still some stuff there. So now the sheikh tells him, begin to beg. Beg. We have a lot of that in California. Can you go? And it's different, okay? I understand. Some of you may say, yeah, I can do it. I'm not talking about on the corner where nobody knows you. I'm talking about in front of the masjid where everybody knows you. Where everybody knows you. Yes, for sure. Well, this is a whole topic. Inshallah, we'll get there. All right? That question is a good question. Absolutely, a good question. But remember what I told you, right? Well, I'll come back to that. Inshallah, if we have time, I'll come back to it. So he begins to tell him. He tells him, go and beg in front of the masjid. Why? To break his nafs. But he's not begging for money that he's going to keep and spend. He has to give the money away that he begs, that he gets. But he said his nafs, He said, there were days, he said, I would go to the masjid and I would tell myself, today I'm going to do it. And I couldn't do it. And then I would go the next day, I'm going to do it today. I'm going to do it. And he said, that went on all time and time again. And it's something very similar to Imam Ghazali. When Imam Ghazali said that he wanted to embark on the path of purification, he said he just couldn't bring himself to do it. He couldn't. He said every day he would take one step forward and then one step back. One step forward and one step back. Until finally Allah removed the ability for him to speak. And then that's when he sincerely embarked on the path. So he says, nothing in the world cut deeper into the arteries of my soul than that. Nothing. He said, I felt the ego break. He said, I felt it. What's he talking about? He was known as being the faqih, the one with knowledge. He was known, in the society of having rank. And so now he's coming before the people as if he is in need in order to break his nafs. In order to break his nafs. And so he says, my soul wished for bodily death. That was the level of the mujahada, the struggle. It was at that level. So then he goes and says, the people were embarrassed for him. Because now he's coming across his peers. They're imams, fuqaha, ulama, they're leaders, teachers, scholars. And they're like, why are you doing this? But he began to tell himself, purify your gold. Meaning, purify your soul. Purify your soul. You're doing the thing that's heavy on your soul. Right? And by that, you're going to draw near. Okay? So then the shaykh told him to go to cleaning up the suq. To be the trash man. To be the trash man. To go, and it's not like here, right? Where it's just plastic and stuff like that. There is garbage. So he said that he would take the garbage, put the garbage in the bag, and it would just keep piling on each other until the ooze of the garbage would come out the bottom of the bag, and he would carry it on his back. And he said he would purposely find the people that held him in high esteem and go in front of them while he was telling himself, purify your gold. Okay? Now, I'm going to end here, right? Okay, I'm going to end here. These are some of the things that he mentioned about karama. I told you last week, right, about karama, about miracles, right? You have some miracles which are hisasiyah. They are, the senses can witness them. And then you have some miracles which are ma'nawiyah, which is like if Allah removes your veil and you see an angel. If Allah removes your veil and you see a jinn or something like that, right? That's different, okay? So a miracle of hisasiyah would be like if you see someone or you, no, never mind. I'm just going to tell you what he said, all right? He said that one day he was in his house and he was doing dhikr. He was in his house, he was doing dhikr. And he said, there was someone in the house with him. Right? And he says, I saw a bird with no feathers. And it was moving, he was doing dhikr, and the bird was moving its beak like this. Moving its beak, going back and forth. In the same rhythm as him. In the same rhythm. And he said, I drew near to it. And he said, I was looking at it. And then he asked his students who were in the house with him, do you see the bird? And they said, no. And then he knew, right, that it was an angel in the representation of a bird. Okay? And then he says, one day I went to the mountains to see my family. He said, I went to the mountains to see my family, and Dhuhr came in while I was going up the mountain. And he said, there was no water. There was nowhere to make water. Of course, he could have made tayammum. But he said, he thought to himself, there are some awliya, there's some friends of God. They have narrated that, like they could just wish for water and it would appear. This is karama ma'nawiyya, right? This is a miracle that you can witness with your eyes and your hands and things like that, right? So he said he heard some stories like this before. And he said, as he thought it, and he came around the corner, there was water coming down the side of the mountain. So he made wudu, he made salat, and went to see his family. He came back down the mountain where his family was, with his family, to show them the place where the water was. There was no water. So he knew that was done specifically for him. Okay? One day he said that he gave one of his students a mud of flour, right? It's like a hand measurement. And he said, I was able to feed dozens of people even from a handful of flour like this. Handful of flour. All right? And then one day he said one day he was in the mosque after tahajjud, and he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show me. He said, Ya Allah, I want to see one of your friends. Show me one of your friends. Right? A wali. Someone who has drawn near to you. So he said he dozed off for just a few moments, and when he woke up, someone was sitting in front of him and said, let's make dua. Let's make dua. So they began to make dua for each other. So the Sidi Ahmed said, you make dua for me. He said, may Allah give you knowledge of himself. May Allah, he give you knowledge of himself. Right? Which is a very high rank. And then he said, okay, now you for me. Like switch now. And he said, may Allah preserve your faith. That's what he said to the other person. So, let me say this. We live in a time where stories like this, they don't move our hearts. They don't move our hearts because we see the miracle of technology. Okay? So it doesn't move our hearts. But know this. Sidi Ahmed Ibn Ajeeba is one of the accepted scholars. There is ijma about his scholarship, about his level of learning and his teaching. He has tafasir on the Quran. He's written tafsir, explanations of the Quran that has been widely accepted. If you think he is lying about what he experienced, then you cannot accept his religious writings. Because if he'll lie about this, he'll lie about something worse. See? But if you accept his scholarship, you accept as the scholars of his time and afterwards, up till today, have accepted his scholarship, then you have no reason to deny his claim about the break of the norms that he experienced, the miracles that he experienced. Okay? So I'm going to stop right there. We have the pizza. No questions, I'm assuming? Okay, so he's asking me to wrap up. So inshallah, we'll talk. We'll talk right now, inshallah. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله على خير خلقه أشرف الأنبياء المرسلين حبيبنا وشفيئنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما مباركا كثيرا. Allah zidna fil iman. May Allah increase us in faith.